Everyone, welcome back to another College Chaps podcast. Well, it's been some time since the three of us have been round the microphone, so prepare yourselves for 30 minutes of rambling and blethering, as the case may be. But first, we are the College Chaps. I'm George, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Oliver and Alex. How are you both?
Yeah, doing really well. It's less than 4 weeks to the start of the college football season, and this season I think has got the potential to be awesome on the field. And I think that the return of the EA Sports college football game after its long hiatus has really revved up existing college football fans, and it is getting more college football, more people involved and loving college football. And I think that's only a great thing as far as I'm concerned. So it feels like everyone is excited for the college football season, and rightfully so.
I think we are on the verge once again because of CFB 25 of coming away from this era of superstars that we've been in to going back to being this era of cool teams again. And that's when college football's at its most fun because now it's so much easier to learn about all the teams in college football for next year. Yes, it's EA's opinion on those teams, but also you get to know a lot more about the teams around you through the medium of the video game rather than just knowing about the 10 different quarterbacks that ESPN or whoever are speaking about in the run up to the season. So I think we're going to go back to this classic college football feel of who's this random team from the group of five that we love, but on a much bigger and more widespread basis because of having college football 25. And I haven't actually played it yet. I've not been home in a month, and I didn't bring my Xbox with me traveling. So I've not played it yet, and I can't wait to get home on Friday morning and fire it up.
And I'm far from an expert. I'm as far from an expert as you're going to find in this line of work. But certainly, to your point, Alex, I think it's done a really good job of creating the stadium atmosphere and the kind of the history and background to the team. So to your point, I think it's great that we get to that point. And as we enter, and we've said this before, but as we enter our sixth season of covering football, college football, it feels as if there's never been a greater demand for college football, certainly on this side of the pond. But we'll go on and talk about what the rest of the world is thinking about football in a second. So let's kick off. We've all been away in different forms over the last few weeks. The college football world doesn't stand still. Let's quickly touch on the media days that we've had over the last week, 2 weeks actually. Ollie, I know that you've kind of studied some of this quite closely. What were your initial takeaways from the media days that you were able to witness?
Well, George, let me just say, first off, neither myself or Alex has been obviously far away from college football, entrenched in volleyball, and we're very proud of him for the way that he's done on that front. I have been closely following media days, but I am nowhere near as closely been following it as you, George Somerville, on the ground in Dallas at the SEC Media Day. So I'll give some thoughts. But before we move on to another topic afterwards, I do want to get your thoughts on SEC Media Day. So I'm going to veer away from that conference. My biggest takeaway from college football media days was the Big 12 and just how gun swinging, swaggery, open for business the Big 12 has become under Brett Yormark. I think this is the biggest takeaway. And it was the very first media day, so it's easy for that to kind of be an overarching, resonating thought because it was a standalone one, whereas every other conference pretty much had to contend with some other conference having availability at the same time. The Big 12 was very much standalone. But Brett Yormark came out as he has done, like he did when he first took over as a commissioner of the Big 12, and it's like, we're open for business. And we've talked about it on this podcast before. We've talked about some of the moves that they've made in the last 2 years as the Pac-12 crumbled around itself, and the ACC has found itself in a position where it simply isn't strong, potentially on the field as well as off the field, with the lawsuits and teams wanted to jump ship, and some of the programs that they added almost out of desperation in this most recent cycle of college football realignment. The Big 12 has been smart, it's been savvy, it's been shrewd about how it goes about its business, and in that, I think Brett Yormark has been the perfect commissioner for the Big 12, and I think that came across very loud and clear at Big 12 Media Days with his statements himself, his initial opening address. Every time he spoke to the media, he came across as a guy who is happy with what he's built so far, but he's also not happy to sit on what he's built so far. He's not going to be happy until the Big 12 is talked about in the same breadth as the SEC and the Big 10 is right now. And I won't say the ACC because ain't nobody wants to be talked about in the same breadth as the ACC right now, sadly, as a Boston College fan. So yeah, that was the thing that struck me. Everything Brett Yormark said, everything that anyone involved with the Big 12, coaches, players, media that cover the Big 12 closely and regularly, talking with so much confidence about this product that they have, talking with so much confidence about this commissioner that they have, talking with so much confidence about the future that this conference has. And I think, it's talking season, as we said on the last podcast that we had with Andy Staples. I think the Big 12 has done the best job of talking in these last 3 weeks. I really do. And so that's my biggest takeaway from the 3 weeks of college football media days.
Yeah. Well, 3 conferences that matter. Georgia's obviously covering off the SEC. Ollie's covered off the Big 12. So I'm going to talk about the Big 10 and some takeaways from that. My first takeaway is about Ryan Day, because that's a guy that's under some pressure to perform, and you feel like he has to perform this year, otherwise Ohio State could end the relationship there and part ways. But I actually thought he looked quite calm and quite almost head coach like in his 5th or 6th Big Ten media days, as I believe it is. I thought he handled the questions about losing 3 on the spin to Michigan really well. I thought he didn't sound anywhere near as abrasive as he sounded in media interviews in the past. He sounded a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more like a guy who has some confidence in the athletes around him, in the people around him, in the program, in the direction that it's going in. Coming into our annual Coaches Hot Seat episode, which I'm hoping we're going to record when we're together in person in a couple of weeks. I think he would have been a name. He might have been a name that I'd have floated on that episode. But also, like now watching him in that interview, I think actually maybe I'm even more convinced that they're going to have the good season. They're going to have the good outcome that we expect. They've got the talent, and the talent's never been the question. The question has always been, can Ryan Day keep it together when he's there? Can he put a winning product on the field? And I have a lot more confidence based on his Big Ten Media Day appearances than I did or I have done previously. On that side of things, I think, I still don't think Lincoln Riley is a really good fit for USC. I feel like he was almost the opposite of Ryan Day in that he didn't look comfortable in his media addresses. He didn't give straight answers. He talked around a lot of things, especially about the rivalry game with Notre Dame happening every year now that USC was in the Big Ten and Notre Dame was still independent. And he just came across as someone who's feeling the pressure a little bit going into a season where he has to have some success at this point and being at that program for that long. So, there's some differing fortunes there. I know we're not talked a huge amount about the ACC, but I do want to talk about Pitt and Pat Narduzzi and his comments, because I love someone who comes out and calls out bullshit in their press conferences, and I love someone that takes shots at rival schools, and he did. He said it was great to have West Virginia back on the schedule. He said they'd love to play Penn State. Pitt would love to play Penn State, but Penn State don't want to do it. He accused them of being scared. He accused them of running away from Pitt. And that is the kind of shit that I love at media days, because it creates storylines that are great for every college football fan, even if you're not a fan of those two schools. I'm more hail Pitt than I am anything to do with Penn State, but that's mainly because of volleyball connections than anything else. But huge fan of the way Pat Narduzzi conducted himself at ACC Media Days as well. So yeah, that's my little roundup. But let's go over to the main event, Mr. Big Time, Mr. Somerville.
Oh, I think we can drop that moniker as quickly as it. We should actually have talked about what you had done over the summer, because you do some incredible stuff with volleyball. But maybe that's a topic for another conversation. Just on the ACC, I listened with intent to what Ryan McGee said about it, because he had been asked to go to ACC Media Days for quite some time, given he's based in Charlotte, but it always seemed to coincide with SEC Media Days, and he went along this year and nearly got sent home, because he kept on saying that it was such a weird set of media days, with the whole Florida State Clemson dynamic going on. He said there was a weird weird atmosphere, a weird temperature in the room, apparently at every interview. So I'm not sure he's getting invited back next year. But he was at SEC Media Days, and it was as you would imagine, a bit of a splash. With it being in Texas, I did get the feeling that it felt a slightly bigger event than last year. Maybe naively hadn't quite appreciated with moving west to Dallas, that the media would be heavily skewed towards Texas and Oklahoma. I think that was a deliberate ploy by the SEC, but perhaps had taken them a little bit by surprise just how much of a demand there was. So what you had on the first day, which seemed to ruffle a few feathers, was it opened with LSU, and I think it was South Carolina, Ole Miss, and who was the last one? Vandy on day one. And what ended up happening was that it was almost in total questions about how Texas and Oklahoma were going to fare in the SEC. So I think that had started to ruffle a few feathers. But I mean, I guess that was undoubtedly the key story from the SEC. And just as you have both articulated about the Big 12, Texas came in with a Texas-sized swagger, no question about that. I don't think they are certainly not going to feel overwhelmed by any of this. Oklahoma were a little bit more low-key, but nonetheless, not coming into the league to be the whipping boys. So certainly, and we're going to talk about who we think are maybe overhyped and perhaps the dark horses, but that was certainly the principal takeaway from it. The other thing I would say, I know I was most surprised that he was there on the Monday, particularly given his early slot. But Lane Kiffin was in attendance, and there was a nice tribute by a lot of different coaches. Commissioner said a few words. Kiffin clearly didn't want to talk about it much at all, but he did a really good job of it, and I think you take your cap off to him for doing that under such difficult circumstances. And then the last thing I'll say is it's quite clear that Billy Napier jacket is on a shaky peg, as they say up here. Just about everybody talked about the schedule that Florida has got. And that he will certainly be one that we'll talk about in our hot seat special, Alex. That's for sure. But you know, I think his comment, which was said outside of the media rooms to a kind of pack of, I assume, kind of Florida-based beat writers, that he felt he was on track to wear he wanted to be. I don't think went down quite in the same way as he thought it was going to go down. So, no question, Billy Napier's on the hot seat. And just finally, I read something today about Hugh Freeze. That boosters at Auburn already getting pretty antsy with the recruiting position at Auburn, and I don't know how accurate. I got in touch with an Auburn beat writer when I was out there, who's going to come on to the podcast, so maybe we'll get a little bit more into it. But suggestions in the media today that Hugh Freeze wasn't far away from not starting the season with Auburn. So that sounds like Auburn things already starting to cook, which would be really interesting. So, yeah, it was a blast, to be perfectly honest. Right, let's get on to let's talk about dark horses, because it's easy to say who's overhyped, right? We've talked about a lot of the teams that are probably getting a lot of the attention. And we can run this into another topic that we were going to talk about, which is unexpected college football playoff candidates. So who do you think is flying under the radar? Who wants to go first?
I'm gonna put something on the line here. I'm gonna put myself out there. Your 2024 Big 12 champions, the Kansas Jayhawks.
Oh, oh,
I like what they're returning. I like them in a conference that is up in the air, brand new, completely open. There are teams that are tough in that conference for sure. There are good teams in the Big 12, but I think Kansas are among them as a good football team. And that conference is going to be hella fun to watch. It's going to be wide open. It's going to be won by a team with not a great record, probably, because there's so many teams in there that are good. It's just primed for chaos, and I fancy them to emerge from that chaos as Big 12 champions and find taking a spot in the college football playoff because of that fact.
just on that point, to both of you, clearly every league has restructured this year, some more than others. But do you think in general there's going to be this level of chaos that people are talking about, which is and added to the fact that the playoff moves to 12 teams? This could be an unprecedented college football season this year, could it?
Well, the the proof's in the pudding of this podcast, because when you were going to throw to me, my choice for a college football playoff dark horse would be the Arizona Wildcats. Because I think Arizona is being underrated massively in the Big 12, and that that point right there showcases like everything that is going to be great about this college football season. I think because there are a number of conferences, such has been the change in college football this offseason, whether that is with conference realignment, whether that's with the transfer portal, whether that's with the impact of name, image, and likeness and how it's impacted roster retention and construction, or whether it's simply with head coaching changes. Nick Saban's retirement set in motion falling dominoes that we haven't seen in college football in terms of head coach turnover. All of those things that you put into a pot, the only spell that's coming out of that cauldron is college football chaos. And I think you'll see it in almost every conference. Yes, Georgia Bulldogs are an element of consistency. Head coach the same, offensive coordinator the same, quarterback the same, driving offenses the same. Like there's some issues there in Georgia that are not based on the field, but you take a team like Georgia out of the equation. There's a lot of lack of continuity for a lot of big programs. So Michigan Wolverines, for example, the reigning college football champions. Huge roster turnover, huge coaching staff turnover. It could have been a lot worse coaching staff turnover wise. They managed to retain some guys below Sharon Moore, who I think is a great head coach hire. Don't get me wrong with that assertion. But the Michigan Wolverines aren't going to enter this season on the same footing as we've seen previous reigning college football national champions. So yeah, I think there's the potential for absolute chaos across nearly all the conferences. except probably Conference USA, where Liberty's going to absolutely walk it again. But yeah, I think that is the point right there in your question about dark horses. We've picked out 2 college football playoff dark horses from the same conference.
Michigan's such an interesting team this year for me because they're almost like a throwback national champion in that, they had players leave. Obviously, you didn't see many coaches leave after winning a national championship pre-transfer portal era, but you did see teams that had a big change, a big turnover, sort of pre-Saban dominance with Alabama. Like a team would win a national championship and then they'd graduate quite a few guys, go off to the NFL. You might retain some of your team, but you would have to almost create new stars. And Michigan they're going to be so interesting to watch because they're going to have to create new stars this year. They aren't going to be able to rely on the people that got them to the national championship that they just won. And to me, that's super exciting. They're an exciting team. They're a team that I'm going to watch early on in the college football season because I'm interested to see where they're at and what they're doing this coming year.
But we have got to a point where we've almost written Michigan off, right? And now we've seen great college football teams in the past who are able to continue to recruit in the space and are able to have a conveyor belt of talent. I guess the big issue for Michigan is the Harbaugh effect and what that will mean. So does Sharon Moore provide some consistency to Ollie's point about the coaching changes? But it does feel a little bit like we collectively, Michigan's been written off, and of course that's what's going to stand, or that's who's going to stand in Ryan Day's way to a Big Ten championship. So he doesn't have the greatest of records against him. I'm not sure how worthy this is of comment, but I nearly choked on my cornflakes this morning when I read Kirk Herbstreit's dark horse for the season, which was the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And I did choke on my cornflakes until I looked at the schedule. And I'm not quite sure what's happening in the Big Ten, but their schedule is, I don't know, can I use the word joke? But they avoid both Ohio State and Michigan this year. So yeah, they play USC, they play UCLA, they play Washington, but good Lord, the schedule is not what I expected it to be from a Big Ten conference. I'm not sure it's worthy of comment, but I'll throw it out there to see what you. I know Kirk Herbstreit likes to have some talking points to keep things spicy ahead of the season, but that was not a name I was expecting.
I think you look at what Rutgers did last year, and to your point, I think Rutgers have got the easiest schedule in the Big Ten quite comfortably. You look at what they did last year. You look at the direction they're moving in under Greg Schiano. You look at some of the players they bring back this year. Running back Kyle Monange, for example, is a guy who's on the Maxwell Award watch list. And they've got some great talent on both sides of the ball. I think the quarterback situation is debatably terrible. If you're talking about a team that's a dark horse for anything, I think Herbstreit's obviously lost the plot if he thinks that Rutgers are going to win the Big Ten or go to the college football playoff. I think, yeah, they could go to a bowl game again this year, which would be an unprecedented level of success in recent times for that program. But yes, a dark horse for the college football playoff or the Big Ten title is quite something.
Well, that would be the chaotic college football season that we've been seeking so desperately if Rutgers were going to make. Can I just go back to Florida because I wanted to talk about schedules and you touched a little bit about it. The second half of that schedule would keep everybody awake at night. They've got Tennessee on the road, they've got Kentucky at home, they've got Georgia on the road, they've got Texas on the road, LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, and Florida State at home. I find it hard to believe that Billy Napier's going to see out this season as the head coach of Florida. And maybe I should have held this back for our much vaunted hot seat special, but I'm not sure Billy Napier gets through this year.
I think when you close out the season like that, you almost leave him in to see out the year because you don't want to bring someone else in to face that gauntlet of teams back to back to back. Like let them do the damage. It's like Florida's one of those programs, right? They'll get hurt by being bad, but they're not going to get that badly hurt by being bad. It's still the University of Florida, right? It's still a blue blood program. You're still going to get kids that want to go there. You know, it's still one of the best sporting institutions in the US, produce more Olympic athletes than any other school, any other NCAA school in this current Olympic cycle. Like from that perspective, you've still got that ethos. It's a little bit like Texas in that it's a job that is kind of just sitting numb at the minute until someone worth it comes in and takes it over. And when that happens, they'll come back and they'll be a force again until that person wears out their welcome. So, I think it's one of those where it's not like one of these schools where you have to put loads in because if you have a bad season, it's going to kill you recruiting wise for 2 or 3 years, and that's going to end your program's dominance. I think it's one of those where you just ride it out, get rid of him at the end of the season, and see who's available to come in and take over.
So we talked a little bit about those dark horses. Let's touch very quickly on teams which are being overhyped. A couple of names that were touted significantly during the media days that I was at were Ole Miss and Missouri. People are very, very high on Missouri. A lot of that is about the consistency at coaching level and obviously the returning, specifically seniors to that team. Looking to build, and certainly Eli Drinkwitz was very confident at media days. Ole Miss clearly also building something there. So those two teams, plus in Big Ten, our perennial underachievers, Penn State, and then the new boys, USC. Are we? And I'm not sure we are overhyping USC because I think you're right, Alex. Out of Big Ten days, from what I saw, there was more questions over Lincoln Riley than there were answers. But are we overhyping those four teams going into the new season?
I don't think so. I think Penn State are correctly hyped. I think USC are correctly hyped because it could break their way and they could both have decent seasons. I think they'll never, both of those two programs right now, with how good other programs are, like there's a cycle. There's only so much talent produced. There's only so many programs that can win games, especially when you reduce from a Power 5 to essentially a Power 3 in terms of conferences, and really a Power 2. The Big 12 is making noise that it's a power conference, but it's still lacking those big blue bloods in there. Really, it's the SEC and the Big 10. And if you're the second tier in either of those two conferences, you're kind of struggling at the minute to match the big guns that are good. You need a Georgia to not be great, or an Alabama to not be great, or a Texas to not be great, a Michigan to not be great, and then Penn State can be great because they've been able to go and recruit the best kids and can go in and compete. So, from that perspective, like I think they'll both be okay. They will disappoint their fans, and they'll probably not disappoint pundits who kind of have that lack of bias towards them. I sort of fully expect them to have the kind of seasons that people expect them to have, which is that middling season. They'll go to a bowl. If stuff breaks their way, they might go to a New Year's Six bowl. They might sneak in the playoff, but I don't think they'll have any chance of winning a national championship.
Ollie, disagree?
I think the team that you circle out of the ones that you mentioned is Ole Miss, because of all those teams, the expectation I think is higher for Ole Miss. National perception and expectation is higher for Ole Miss than it is for Penn State, than it is for USC. Penn State will always have a great team. They'll always fall short in the James Franklin era. We talk about that, it feels like, every year. I think probably I got a little bit overexcited about Penn State last year and forgot myself. if memory serves me correctly. So I'm not making the same mistake this year. But Ole Miss have currently got the fifth shortest odds to win the whole thing, to win the national championship. And yes, there's some great talent on that football team. Jackson Dart is a quarterback who can compete with the very best of them. Lane Kiffin went out into the transfer portal this offseason and he added to where has been historically the weakest areas of Lane Kiffin Ole Miss teams. So he brought in some high level players on the defensive side of the ball. They've got a wide receiver in Trey Harris who's could potentially challenge as one of the best wide receivers in college football this year. So all the pieces they've got an easy. We talk about schedules. Ole Miss got one of the easiest schedules in the SEC as well. So all the pieces are there, and so is the expectation. And I think if you're looking for a team that won't live up to that expectation this year, Ole Miss, just by the very nature of the level of expectation, I think is a program that you've got to watch out for in terms of disappointing against this preseason hype. In all honesty,
But I think with Ole Miss, like they're different, they're perceived differently to Penn State and USC. I feel like you talk to a normal college football fan who isn't a USC fan, who isn't a Penn State fan, especially Penn State, and you bring up Penn State, and it's almost like, oh, really? Whereas Ole Miss is fun. Like they're fun to watch, and Lane Kiffin is fun to be around. He's energetic. He creates good vibes and positive vibes. Like if Ole Miss won the national championship this year, I think all three of us would kind of be pretty stoked about it. If Penn State won the national championship this year, I don't know. I don't know if I would be like super stoked about it or not. Like it's one of those that like I feel like I know Ole Miss are easy to cheer for if they're not playing your team, but Penn State, you kind of like to see them get turned over because it'd be funny.
I mean, Ole Miss have had back-to-back double-digit win seasons, right, which has never been done before in Oxford. So there definitely is which is why Jackson Dart and some of his teammates are back for another year, because I think a lot of people thought Jackson Dart would move on. So the expectations are high. I mean, interestingly, I hadn't quite appreciated this until I heard the stat, but everybody thinks that Lane Kiffin's teams throw the ball all the time, but Ole Miss runs the ball as often as it does. The ball is in the air. So the replacing of Quinshon Judkins is going to be pretty paramount to how they're going to get on. Before we go, because we're running out of time, I'm not going to ask Alex this question because I know what the answer is going to be. Is Texas good enough to win the SEC championship and the national championship this year, Oliver?
yeah, I actually think they are one of a handful of teams who are good enough to win the national championship. You look at Texas, you look at bringing back Quinn Ewers, you look at the stable of running backs. They've got a great depth of pass catchers, both at wide receiver and tight end. Offensive line, you'll struggle to find a better offensive tackle than Kelvin Banks Jr. This season. The defense is stacked with talent. So absolutely, they've got a chance to compete both in the SEC. I think they're better set up to compete in the SEC than Oklahoma are, and I think they're well set up to compete nationally like they did last season. Absolutely.
Well, that was my question to Alex. Is Oklahoma good enough to win the SEC and the national championship?
You'd been better off asking Alex if Texas were. You get less biased answer if you asked him about Texas winning the national.
He's rolling his eyes in anticipation of it.
Oklahoma and Texas A&M have the same chance of the SEC.
Right, that's all from us on this episode. It's been too long, and it's awesome to have us all back round the microphone. Follow us over the coming weeks because we're going to have some awesome guests as we lead up to the start of the new season and then throughout the season. If you know and have listened to us on a regular basis, you know that we mix our startling gossip and content with some pretty decent guests. You can follow us on X and Instagram. Our social media accounts are at College Chaps. Please give us a follow. Thanks to Ollie and Alex for their brilliant input. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.